All right, I give up. I was watching the Indians and the Cubs. Thanks to a rain delay and extra innings, it's still going on, and it's past midnight on the East Coast. So congratulations, Chicago and Cleveland. You guys aren't sleeping tonight. Either way, whoever wins this. But the Blackhawks. Gotta talk about the Blackhawks. And the first article I found about the Blackhawks really interested me. I'm sorry I'm wearing my Canucks hat. I'm not sure where the Blackhawks one is. Unless, oh, there it is. One sec. I gotta get into my thing here. There. Now I've achieved synergy. So, while I try not to be distracted by the Cubbies and something taking place that I've waited a long time for, strike. All-American Hawks. Heading into the 1937-38 season, there was no reason to believe the Chicago Blackhawks, which was two words at that time, Blackhawks, were Stanley Cup contenders. The team had finished 13 games under 500 and out of the playoffs the previous year. And the Blackhawks' offensive leader, Paul Thompson, about to turn 31, was in the twilight of his career. So, that's interesting. Also interesting is the fact that this camera is so... Why am I so off-center? Oh, never mind. I'm just not very bright sometimes. I'm just not bright. In fact, Chicago struggled through the 1937-38 campaign, finishing with just 14 wins and 37 points in a 48-game schedule. New York Rangers general manager Lester Patrick mocked the 8 American-born players put on the roster by Chicago owner Major Frederick McLaughlin as a bunch of amateurs. Still, Chicago qualified for the postseason, the only team with a losing record to do so, ending up in third place in the American Division. The quarterfinals pitted the Hawks against the Montreal Canadiens. The Habs had finished a dozen points better than Chicago in the regular season, but lost the deciding game of the best-of-3 series in overtime. Thompson, coming off an all-star year with Chicago, had the puck deflect off his skate past goalie Wilf Cood at 11:47 of overtime to send the Canadiens packing. Future Hall of Famer Aurel Joliat had missed the entire playoffs for Montreal with an injured shoulder and announced his retirement 3 days later. Up next in the semifinals was the New York Americans, and again the Blackhawks stunned their opponents in 3 games, setting up a finals matchup against the Canadian Division's best team, the Toronto Maple Leafs. To this point in the season, Blackhawks goaltender Mike Caracas, a native of Aurora, Minnesota, had carried the load in net. But before Game 1 of the finals, doctors discovered Caracas had a broken toe. Desperate to find a netminder, Chicago located former New York Americans goalie Alfie Moore in a Toronto bar, according to urban legend, and signed him to a contract. Moore's appearance was a success as the Blackhawks won Game 1 3-1 at Maple Leaf Gardens. Toronto evened the series when it shot 5 pucks past another hastily acquired substitute goalie, Paul Goodman. By the time the series shifted to the Windy City, Caracas was fitted with a steel boot and ready to return to the lineup. The Blackhawks won the next 2 games at home to win the unlikeliest of championships, becoming victorious with a roster entirely comprised of half Americans, or full or half Americans. So pessimistic was the NHL about the Blackhawks' chances that the Stanley Cup was never sent to Chicago, and the winners had no trophy with which to celebrate. Can you imagine? But it answers a question that was asked many, many times over. Has a team of mostly or all Americans ever won the Stanley Cup? Yes. 1937-38, and they weren't a 500 team. The other Chicago article I found in here is on Glenn Hall. And Glenn Hall has a record that nobody will ever approach. Not a goaltender. No chance. Before teams had regular roster spots for backup goaltenders, Glenn Hall was a victim of the numbers game early in his career. The powerhouse Detroit Red Wings of the early 50s had Terry Sawchuk as their unchallenged starting goalie. An all-star team selection in each of the first 5 full seasons, Sawchuk led the Red Wings to 3 Stanley Cups. But towards the end of 54-55, the last of those seasons ended with a championship in the Motor City. General manager Jack Adams recalled Hall from the Edmonton Flyers of the Western Hockey League. The 23-year-old Hall won both games in which he played, surrendering just 2 goals. Adams rolled the dice and traded Sawchuk in the prime of his career. Hall was anointed as Detroit's netminder for the new season, and the rookie was nothing short of superb, playing in all 70 games while posting 12 shutouts. As a reward for his efforts, Hall was named the winner of the 55-56 Calder Trophy. Using an unconventional butterfly stance that set the standard for future goalies, Hall dropped to his knees, spreading his legs like a butterfly to take away the bottom corners of the net from the shooter. He played every minute of the 56-57 campaign, earning a first All-Star team selection. But when the Red Wings faltered in the first round of the playoffs versus Boston, Hall became a target of Adams' wrath. In a trade engineered to punish Detroit forward Ted Lindsay for trying to start a players' association, Adams dispatched Terrible Ted to Chicago on July 23rd, also sending Hall along in the deal. Hall proved Adams wrong, continuing to show his durability by playing every minute of every game for the next 5 years. Hall was a stalwart in the Blackhawks net. In '61, the Humboldt, Saskatchewan native reached the pinnacle of success, backstopping Chicago to a Stanley Cup victory. Finally, on November 7, 1962, Hall was forced to sit out because of a bad back, giving way to Dennis DeJordy. Having played in 502 consecutive games, Hall established a record for goaltenders that will never be broken. Even more incredible is that Hall achieved it without wearing a mask. Hall's final stop was in St. Louis after the Blues claimed him in the 1967 expansion draft. He led the team to the Stanley Cup Finals, earning the Conn Smythe Trophy despite a sweep at the hands of the Montreal Canadiens. In 16 seasons, Hall was a 3-time Vezina winner and an All-Star team selection on 11 occasions. So there you go, Glenn Hall. Oh, it looks like the Cubs still have a choke in him after all. All right, I'm going to go ahead and mute Mr. Television. And let's talk about Bill Wirtz, because Chicago fans may be getting ready for some disappointment again. You never count your chickens if you're a Cubs fan, right? I know I never have. Ever. So even when they score 2 in the top of the 10th, I go, that's not enough. That's my reaction, just that's not enough. And now let's take a look at this. The reason that the Hawks from the mid-'60s until very recently were down and out. Bill Wirtz versus the Chicago Blackhawks. This is in the greatest rivalries issue, 46 rivalries in this magazine. I promised I'd truck some of them out. And Bill Wirtz is one of the interesting ones, and it fits right into Chicago's history. And you're not going to find a lot of Hawks fans that love Wirtz, but let's take a look at this. It's hard to find anyone who believes Bill Wirtz's policy not to televise Chicago Blackhawks home games was a good idea, but there was at least one occasion when it absolutely worked to his advantage. March 19, 1998 was Dennis Savard's jersey retirement night at the United Center, and Wirtz, as team owner, wanted to pay homage to his former star with a speech and ceremony at center ice. But as Wirtz stepped onto the red carpet and approached the podium, the boos began to cascade from the crowd, and they didn't stop until he made his exit. They booed him off the ice, remembered longtime Chicago writer Matt Carlson. He didn't even say a word. It was over the top, and he just walked off in disgrace. While video of the spectacle doesn't reside on YouTube or anywhere else on the internet, likely a result of Wirtz's no-home TV policy, it was by all accounts a night to remember and a night to forget. That was inappropriate, said former Chicago Blackhawks goalie and broadcaster Darren Pang, who was in attendance that evening as a fan. Savard was someone near and dear to Bill Wirtz. That wasn't a night to boo him. And so it went with Wirtz. Hawks fans and those on the outside detested the man widely referred to as Dollar Bill. They blamed him for squeezing his wallet and allowing Bobby Hull to flee to the World Hockey Association in 1972. They held him responsible for the franchise's epic Stanley Cup drought, which reached 46 years by the time of his death in 2007, and ended at 49 years when the Hawks won in 2010. but mostly they reviled him for not airing home games in the local market. Conversely, those employed by Wirtz saw a different side, a fiercely faithful boss who'd take care of his own. Talk to people who played on or managed his teams, and virtually to a man, they speak with reverence. Michel Goulet, Hall of Famer and Blackhawks left winger from 1990 to 94. I love the man. Sometimes people have a bad reputation, but I don't really listen to that. I want to find out on my own. Rick Dudley, a consultant assistant GM in Chicago from 2004 to 2009. He was a wonderful guy. He was a kind-hearted man who would do anything for you. He was one of the most loyal people I'll ever know. And Pang, a goalie for the club in the 1980s. He was so loyal you could actually screw up 2 or 3 times and he'd stand by you. And Pang did definitely screw up 2 or 3 times. Yeah. I like Pang. I did. And honestly, you know, I don't have a problem with Darren Pang. I think he's a very entertaining color guy. But he wasn't a great goalie. And Chicago definitely gave him a lot of shots. And with that, the World Series now belongs to the Chicago Cubs. So I'll take a moment in this video because this is a live reaction for me. It is finally over, this whole Chicago jinx BS. Bad management doesn't equal a jinx. And that's really what the Cubs had for a long, long time. And I called it. Go back and look at my World Series video that only got 100 views. And I said, Chicago Cubs, as a Cubs fan, they went in 5, but realistically, they went in 7. And they came back and won in 7. And if you're a Cleveland fan, don't worry. Your drought won't last that much longer. It won't. They remind me this year of Cleveland. Cleveland achieved a lot and looked like they were on the verge, and they didn't, and then they did. So Cleveland's up next. But finally, the Chicago Cubs win the World Series, and all that curse talk dies. Finally. Thank God. And does this mean Steve Bartman can show his face in public again in Chicago? Man, they just won the World Series. I hope Steve Bartman gets the game ball. All right. But for every employee who fondly recalls their benign dictator, there are thousands of fans who only saw a cheap tyrant. Frustration that had simmered for years bubbled more ferociously after 1991, when Mark Weinberg started publishing the satirical, unofficial gay program, Blue Line. At first, Weinberg wanted to work with the Blackhawks, complimenting the magazine the team sold on game nights with a stats-filled pregame analysis package. Upon pitching the idea to the club, Weinberg says he was summarily dismissed. They told me to get lost, he said. Think about that, though. I mean, if I went to the Canucks right now and I said, hey, I got a YouTube channel, I got 1,300 subscribers, can I do something official with you guys? The Canucks would be completely justified in saying no. All right, Noah, settle it down. Okay. But the Canucks would be absolutely right to say no. And in this way, I don't blame Bill Wirtz for saying no. We've got our own. No. Because then what's to stop the next guy and the next guy and the next guy? Anyways. Instead, he went solo and started distributing the 4-page newsletter outside the arena, filling it with biting satire and scathing editorial cartoons, much of it aimed at Wirtz. So he reacted like a 4-year-old. Weinberg's dissension landed him a trespassing arrest and a 4-hour stint in jail. Good. That's when he really amped things up. Of course he did. You think trolling started on the internet. We quickly discovered that making fun of Bill Wirtz was a great way to get a response from the fans, Weinberg said. But we weren't cutting edge. Bill Wirtz was already reviled. You can't successfully satirize someone who's beloved. We were just being reactive, but we were ruthless. Good for you, I guess. The negative Wirtz legacy snowballed, and it became de rigueur, I'm too tired, in Chicago, a city renowned for loathing its sports team's owners. Well, I can think of one sports team whose owners should be loved right now, and that's the Chicago Cubs. put the Hawks owner at the top of their hate list. ESPN pegged him as the third greediest owner in sports in 2002. 2 years later, the network ranked Wirtz's franchise as the worst in all sports. Even in death, Wirtz wasn't safe from derision. After his passing, GM Dale Talon gave a memorial speech at United Center, and catcalls and boos bounced around the arena. Really? After he died? Video of that episode, incidentally, can be found on YouTube, most probably because the Hawks started airing home games after he died. For Wirtz, it always comes back to home TV. So why the policy? Ironically enough, the quality that so endeared him to people in his inner circle was at the heart of fans' biggest source of his disdain: loyalty. His dad, Arthur, owned many of America's arenas in the 1950s and firmly believed home TV would have a detrimental impact on attendance. Bill inherited his father's beliefs, or at least remained true to them, until the bitter end. It was joked that if Bill Wirtz ever aired home games, his dad would come out of the grave and spank him. In addition, Wirtz put a high value on his regular customers. Bill believed that he was being true to the season ticket subscribers, Pang said. They weren't season ticket holders. He always used the phrase subscribers. Why should other people get to watch at home for free when the subscribers have paid their money? But Pang recognizes why the policy left the masses alienated. He got to witness it firsthand with his 7-year-old son, who wanted to see his local heroes on TV but couldn't. So he wrote a letter to the owner. I remember it, Pang said. It went, "My dad used to play for you. He was a goalie. We love hockey, and now my favorite team is the Detroit Red Wings because we can't watch you on TV." We never got a response. On the ice, Chicago came close to glory a few times under Wirtz, enjoying success in the early 1990s, highlighted by a Cup final appearance in 1992. At the same time, the club had bitter partings with marquee high-profile players such as Savard, Steve Larmer, Jeremy Roenick, and Ed Belfour. While the feuds were often about money, it would be inaccurate to say Wirtz was always unwilling to spend. He was on record as saying he never took a dividend from the Hawks, that all profit was put back into the product. And significant signings, Doug Gilmour, $18 million over 3 years, and he wasn't worth it when he signed that in Chicago at all. And Nikolai Habibulin, $27 million over 4, speak to that philosophy, and Habibulin wasn't worth it either. Dudley says the management team he was part of a GM with Dale Talon was never shackled. When Dale asked me to talk about a player or an acquisition and I went to Bill Wirtz, I don't think he ever turned us down. And what's unfair, terribly unfair, is that everybody associates this big Chicago turnaround in the late 2000s with Bill and Bob Pulford not being there. It started long before that. The day they hired Dale Talon is when that started, and Bob Pulford was still the president and Bill Wirtz was still the owner. They began the process. Fair or not, it's a reality. The fans, for the most part, haven't forgiven, but we're not sure Wirtz would mind. Wirtz often said he put his family first, business second, and nothing else third. This included the fans. So there you go. Bill Wirtz, and that kind of bugs me. The Chicago legacy is an odd one. They weren't a winning team. They weren't a great team. They've won some Stanley Cups. Obviously they've won some Stanley Cups in their existence. But I don't know. I don't look at Chicago and say, what a great set of fans. Obviously they are now. It's really easy to be all happy and cheerful and yay, our team rocks when they've won 3 Stanley Cups in the last decade. But when you're going through rough patches, Chicago did have some bad management, and there were some bad moves made. As I said, they mentioned the 2 contracts that Bill Wirtz okayed, which was Doug Gilmour and Nikolai Habibulin, and they weren't worth the money they got. The Hawks paid too much money for both. Gilmour didn't play those 3 years in Chicago either, I don't think. I don't have a book that has that in there, but I don't think he played all full 3 years in Chicago. I know he went to Montreal and ended back in Toronto. But, it's It's a rough position to be in as an owner in the NHL. I can't think of very many owners that people say, "Oh, I love that guy. He's a great owner." Lank, the hell are you doing? Anyways, um, but yeah, so that's where Chicago's been. And this is why when I thought about it today, and I thought, okay, well, if I'm going to talk about Chicago, there's this whole thing with Bill Wirtz. And this whole thing with where the Hawks were. And the Hawks drafting. Oh my God. Let's get into the Hawks drafting. Because a big part of the reason the Hawks stayed down where they were is their drafting was just atrocious. Yeah, it was back before, well, like the 2000s, it definitely got better. Got way better. I mean, you look, even in 2011, they drafted 7 guys who played in the NHL. So that's pretty impressive. They drafted 7 in 2003. It was before that. Great. Now I'm going to have to look through stuff again. 2002. Chicago, nothing interesting there. 2001. Chicago drafted Tuomo Ruutu. Noticeables that were after. I guess a notable would be Dan Hamhuis, Alashemsky. Not a lot of, great players there. 2000. Here we go. At 10 and 11, they drafted Mikhail Yakupov and Pavel Vorobiev. And they both played in the NHL, but not for long. And that was the year that they had two top draft picks. In 1999, they drafted Steve McCarthy at 23 overall. Not much after him, really. I mean, Martin Havlat was drafted a few spots after him, but there were a lot of iffy players drafted that year. 1998, they drafted Mark Bell at eighth overall, but Mark Bell had a decent start to his career, and then it just ended not very well for him. It just seemed to progressively get worse for him. 1997, they drafted Daniel Cleary. Good player. Not a great draft either, so that was probably about as good as it could get. Not that Cleary broke through and had a tremendous career as a Blackhawk, though. In 1995, they drafted Dmitry Nabokov. They really went Russian. They really went on a run there for the mid to late 90s where they really wanted Russian players. And they didn't have any luck with the Russian players. But something changed. Something changed with Chicago. And there's also a belief out there that this is about tanking. As a Canuck fan, I'm kind of infamous right now for saying, look, just tear it down. That doesn't necessarily mean tanking. But it kind of means let it go. But Chicago didn't grab this team through tanking. Let's look back here. In 2004, Dave Bolland, who became a key piece in their first Stanley Cup win, was drafted 32nd overall. Brian Bickle was 41st overall. Troy Brouwer was drafted 214th overall. So those weren't top draft picks. 2005, Nicholas Chalmerson was drafted 108th overall. And then it's just top draft picks from there. Although 2008, they struck out with Kyle Beach. And yet they hit with Ben Smith at 169th overall. I like Ben Smith's game. I know he's kind of bounced around, but I like him. 2009, Brandon Peary was their 59th overall. Byron Freese was 119th. Marcus Kruger was 149th. 2010, with the 24th pick, they grabbed Kevin Hayes, who's now a Ranger, but still. Stephen Johns was drafted 60th overall. He's a pretty good defenseman for my Dallas Stars, so thank you, Chicago. 2011, Brandon Saad was drafted 43rd overall. Andrew Shaw was 139th. 2012, they drafted Teuvo Teravainen at 18th. 2013, Ryan Hartman was 30th. Tyler Mott was 121st. And yeah, I mean, it was, its drafting got better. And a lot of these guys were later draft picks. Duncan Keith should be in here too. I know Duncan Keith was in the second round. I thought it was the second round anyways. Might have been 2001, I guess. But yeah, you look at Chicago, where they are and where they've been, and pretty good team. Pretty good team right now. But their history has been relatively good too. So let's go take a look at that while my cats go nuts. Excuse me. And Greg Zahn, I was right. You were wrong. You said the Indians would win in 5. I said Cubs in 7. And I was right. I'm very proud of that, actually. Funny thing too is the Blackhawks, who were viewed as being a team that's on the downswing this year, and they can't keep it up. They're 6-3-1, so yeah, they seem to be able to actually keep things going, which is good. Now, if I look at career leaders, games played, Stan Mikita owns that. 1,394 games. He also owns the points record with 1,467, which is an impressive total. Stan Mikita, I had a Stan Mikita card in the 70s. One of the few 70s cards I had. He scored 541 goals, but he was second behind Bobby Hull at 604. For games played, Bobby Hull had 1,036, and he scored 1,153 points. Denny Savard scored 1,096 points. Steve Larmer, 923. Doug Wilson, 779. Patrick Kane is 675, so he's running up that list. Jonathan Toews is 10th with 569, and he's behind Jeremy Roenick, who was in 9th place with 596. So of the current Blackhawks, you have both Toews and Kane in the top 10 on the all-time points list. And it really helps legitimize these players as being keystones, as being major factors in the Hawks turning their game around. Power play goals, Steve Larmer, surprisingly, is the leader with 153. Larmer was known for his durability, obviously, with the Iron Man streak he had, and just in general for his all-around play. And I never really thought of him as a power play specialist. But clearly he had some talent in that area. Stan Mikita, 127 goals, power play goals. Bobby Hull, 119. Jeremy Roenick, 108. Denny Savard, 101. Patrick Kane sitting at 79. Jonathan Toews is at 63. Shorthanded goals, Dirk Graham leads the way with 26. I love Dirk Graham. He's one of my favorites. Tony Amonte has 20. Jeremy Roenick, 19. Steve Larmer, 19. Bobby Hull, 18. Eric Nestorenko, 17. Marian Hossa, 17. Troy Murray, 17. Patrick Sharp, 16. Denny Savard, 15. So there's your offensive totals, and there are some pretty damn good ones in there. Goaltending. Goaltending gets interesting because while you're going to think of Phil Esposito when you hear the name Esposito, or Angelo Esposito if you're thinking of the bust Esposito, Tony was a pretty good goaltender. 418 wins as a Blackhawk, 74 shutouts. Originally the property of the Montreal Canadiens, which just shows just how rich they were. Glenn All had 275 wins. Ed Belfour, 201. Corey Crawford's currently sitting at 186. For fourth place, Jocelyn Tebow at 137. Murray Bannerman, 116. Mike Caracas, 114. Charlie Gardner, 112. Nikolai Habibulin, 91. Dennis DeJordy, 90. So, shutouts. Tony Esposito leads the way with 74. He was a shutout machine. Glenn Hall, 51. Charlie Gardner, 42. Ed Belfour, 30. Mike Caracas and Jocelyn Tebow tied for fifth with 28. Then Corey Crawford has 20. Al Rollins with 17. Jeff Hackett with 14. Dennis DeJordy with 13. So pretty good records for everybody. Belfour, of course, is the goalie that a lot of people are going to remember, in my age range anyways, as the epitome of Chicago goaltending. I remember his eagle mask was awesome. That's mostly what I remember, and I remember his rookie season, how amazing he was, and how much I liked him. And then I heard him talk a few times, and I saw some interviews with him, and I thought, he kind of seems like a douchebag. And then as the years went on, it turned into, yeah, he's a douchebag. But anyways, as this is late for me, I look at this team, I look at its future. I think with the way it's being run and the way they seem to always be able to replenish their ranks as they go along, this is a team that doesn't rebuild or retool, they just get better. And when they show any kind of a dip in the standings, they get better and they go right back up. And I'll leave it up to you Blackhawk fans watching this to decide how much of this has to do with Bill Wirtz and how much this has to do with just timing, management, change in focus. Scouting definitely had a lot to do with the Hawks being bad for as long as they were. And now they've got pretty good scouting and they've got pretty good results. So I definitely view Chicago as a team that could win another Stanley Cup. And I think Kane and Taves are fantastic. I do think they're worth the money because 3 Stanley Cups say they're worth the money. Wayne Gretzky only had 4 in his career. As much as he owned the record book, he only had 4 Stanley Cups in his career. So I could definitely see Kane and Taves putting together at least 2 more Stanley Cups and passing that mark. So anyways, that's it for Chicago. I didn't end up needing 2-part video or a 2-part video as much as I thought I was going to. This did pass the half-hour mark, but I'm okay with that. I hope you're okay with that too. When I'm recording these, the histories of, if there's anything in particular that you feel I might have glossed over, like I'm not going to go through year-by-year records with Chicago because it's a lot. It's 92 seasons worth of hockey. And a lot of it is going to be, depending on the era, it's going to show that certain generations of the team have been better than others. And that just goes with what I've said from the magazines I've read from tonight. The Bill Wirtz era kind of had this dark cloud over the team, and when he passed away, that dark cloud went away. But I don't agree with booing him post-mortem. I don't agree with treating people like crap just because they mention him. Because he didn't really do anything overly bad. He just didn't see the need to broadcast games locally, and he made no bones about it. So, anyways, I thank you very much for watching. If you're just browsing, passing through, by all means, hit like and subscribe. And I will be back tomorrow with more content. And I will be back tomorrow as well to talk about the Colorado Avalanche. They're next, and that means I will also be discussing the Quebec Nordiques. So, as I continue this WHA, NHL spin on things, when I go through certain teams, it will continue tomorrow. So, keep that in mind when video gets posted, but I'll definitely put it in the title line as well. Anyways, for Chicago fans, congratulations. Chelsea Dagger has become the most hated song in all of hockey amongst fans that are not Blackhawks fans. And that's because it just gets in your head. And it seems to get in the players' heads that they just don't want to hear that song, and as soon as they hear it, they just get down. So, anyways, full respect to the Blackhawks, and this is coming from a Canuck fan, and as heartbreaking as it's been watching what the Blackhawks have done to the Canucks over the years, they have been the class of the NHL. Sure, Duncan Keith is a dirty player. Sure, there have been other dirty players in Chicago. I definitely would state that Chicago has had more than its share of dirty players over the years. But I've talked about Chicago, or I've talked about Boston. At some point, I'll talk about Philly. And in terms of dirty players, when you've been in the league as long as the Hawks have, you're going to have dirty players. So I don't really need to get into that so much. But anyways, yeah. Thanks for watching, and I'll talk to y'all again tomorrow.